They brought me in on a cargo shuttle, which I thought said everything about what I was supposed to be. No formal escort, no ceremonial entry through the Great Obsidian Gate. Just a mid-rank Ocean attaché with a data chip and instructions to have me fitted for the short sash before the third bell. The sash was gold, it looked expensive, it on, and didn't say anything about the fact that my hands were shaking. Not from nerves. Because I'd been awake for 30 hours, reading every file I could pull on the Ocean High Court, and some of what I'd read had made it hard to sleep. Her name was Verith, Queen of the Ocean Dominion, 23rd of her line, widow of a diplomatic murder her own council had called an accident for 11 months now. I had been selected, I was told, because I was human, because I was quiet, and because the noble houses believed a grieving field medic from the outer corridors would be too dull and too grateful to cause trouble. They were not entirely wrong about the grieving part. I had loved someone once, a Ocean cultural liaison named Sarah, who had spent 3 years teaching me that the universe was larger and stranger and more worth protecting than I'd previously considered. She had died in the same accident that killed the Queen's first consort. I had spent the following decade trying to understand exactly what kind of accident it had been. So when the council selected me, I let them believe what they wanted to believe. I smiled at the attaché. I wore the sash. I walked into the high court of the Ocean Dominion, looking like a man who was simply glad to be there. The chamber was enormous. Obsidian columns rose 40 feet to a vaulted ceiling inlaid with pale gold, and the tiers of noble seating curved around a central floor the color of dark water. The Queen's throne sat at the far end, on a raised dais, a chair built for someone who was meant to be seen, not comfortable. Verith was already seated when they brought me forward. She had copper-toned skin and dark amber eyes, and her black-violet hair was pulled up with something that was either a crown or a weapon, and I genuinely couldn't tell which. She looked at me the way someone looks at a locked door they didn't ask for. I nodded to her. She didn't nod back. The council arranged themselves in 2 rows to either side. Lord Feneth Ore, first of the High Houses, spoke the installation words in a tone that conveyed, very clearly, that he found the entire proceeding beneath him. He called me the Queen's new consort. He said it the way you say it when you mean something else. Several of the assembled nobles smiled. One of them laughed, quietly, behind a hand, but not quietly enough. I memorized the laugh. The banquet that followed was the kind of event designed to be survived rather than enjoyed. Long tables, formal seating, 11 courses I didn't recognize, and largely didn't eat. I sat 2 seats from the Queen, and spent most of the meal watching Lord Ore across the table, who spent most of the meal not looking at Verith in the specific way that people avoid looking at someone they are about to move against. He made his play over the 7th course. It was subtle. Most people in the room probably didn't recognize it for what it was. He addressed the Queen directly, a compliment on her resilience, he called it, and worked into the phrasing a reference to the Compact of Ocean, succession, specifically the clause that allowed the High Houses to petition for regency in the event of a sitting monarch's demonstrated inability govern. He used the word demonstrated twice. The second time he looked at me, the implication was clean. A human consort, chosen in apparent weakness as evidence of diminished judgment. A formal petition to follow within the cycle. The Queen's grip on the table tightened by exactly 1 degree, and I knew she understood what he was doing. And I knew she had no clean answer for it, because the council had spent 11 months positioning for exactly this. What Lord Ore didn't know, what none of them knew, was that I had been reading their correspondence for 4 years. Not illegally, not through any impressive act of espionage. Sarah had left me access to a number of Ocean diplomatic archives that were technically still in my name, and I had simply never stopped reading them. In grief, and then in something harder than grief, in the particular focus that comes when you realize the person you lost didn't die by accident, and the people responsible are still very much at the table. I put down my fork. Lord Ore, I said. The table went quiet. It's surprising sometimes how quiet a room gets when the person no one is watching finally speaks. Compact of Ocean succession does permit a regency petition, I continued. Clause 7, subsection 3. You'd need a majority of the High Houses to co-sign, traditionally 9 of the 13. I looked down the table. Lords Ore, Deathvane, and Cassel have already agreed to sign. Lord Mirren has been offered a trade concession he hasn't answered yet. I'd expect him to decline, given that the route in question passes through sovereign Osean space and the Queen can revoke it faster than your consortium can reroute. That brings you to 8. You're one short, and you've been one short for 3 months, which is why you're still sitting at a banquet table, making implications, instead of filing the petition. Lord Ore had gone very still. The reason you're one short, I said, is that Lord Ferris withdrew his support in the 4th month after someone forwarded him a certain private communication, one that suggested, in fairly direct language, that his family's holding on the 2nd moon was to be redistributed after the transition. I looked at Lord Ferris, who had gone a color I didn't have a name for. He withdrew quietly, he didn't report it. I understand the decision, even if I don't particularly admire it. The room was so silent I could hear the ventilation. I reached into my jacket, slowly. The way you move in a room full of people who are deciding whether to be afraid of you, and set a data chip on table. It was a very ordinary data chip. I'd bought it at the spaceport kiosk. That contains 12 sets of correspondence, I said, spanning 4 years. It covers the agreement to classify the Queen's consort's death as an accident, the communication strategy for the 11 months following, the construction of the Regency petition, and the targeting of individuals the Council believed might be sympathetic to Her Majesty. It also contains 3 references to the same event that killed Sarah. I paused. She was a cultural liaison. She was in the wrong corridor because someone moved a meeting without logging it. I want that on the record. No one moved. I looked at Vareth. She was watching me. Her amber eyes were very still, and her posture had not changed. She still sat exactly as a queen is trained to sit, composed and visible and absolutely in command of the chair. But something in her face had shifted, the way a room shifts when a window opens and the air changes. She was looking at me not as a locked door now, as something she was recalculating in real time. These are serious claims, Lord Ore said. His voice had recovered some of its surface smoothness. Presented without. The cipher keys are embedded in the chip header, I said. The Ossetian judiciary uses a standard verification protocol. It should take your court recorders about 40 minutes to authenticate the archive. Picked up my water glass. I'm not going anywhere. Lord Ore looked at Lord Deathvane. Lord Deathvane looked at the table. The Queen spoke for the first time since the banquet had begun. Lord Ore, she said. Her voice was low and very even, and it carried the length of the chamber without effort. You will remain in this room until the judiciary confirms or refutes what my consort has presented. All of you will remain. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Bailiff, seal the doors. The doors sealed. In the hours that followed, while the court recorders worked and the noble houses sat with the particular stillness of people who have realized the ground is no longer where they left it, Vareth did not look at me often. But when she did, it was direct, deliberate, true. The look of someone who is deciding whether to trust what they're seeing. When the judiciary announced their preliminary authentication, sufficient to hold for formal proceedings, she stood. The chamber rose with her out of reflex. She looked at me across the table. You've carried this for 4 years, she said. It wasn't quite a question. She was quiet for a moment. Why, I thought about Sarah. About the way she'd laughed at my pronunciation of Osean planetary names, and then patiently corrected me, and then laughed again. About the corridor that had been moved. About what it costs to love something that the universe is indifferent to keeping. Someone should have, I said. Vareth held my gaze for a long moment. Then she turned to face her court. Her court, unmistakably hers now. Conspiracy unpinned and visible for what it was. And the noble houses looked at her the way they hadn't looked at her in 11 months, like a monarch. She rested 2 fingers on the back of my chair as she passed. Light as a word, brief as a vow, it was enough.